This morning, I don't want to talk about nationalism in general. I want to talk about Israeli nationalism. And when we talk about Israeli nationalism, there's a conversation which has to do with what are the potentials of Israeli nationalism? What nationalism can Zionism encompass and embrace? It is, we can call it an aspirational nationalism. And then there's nationalism in reality. And it's what national discourse in Israel over the last 4 or 5 years is about that will be the focus of my remarks this morning. On a personal level, as I said at the outset, I am a nationalist. But I recognize that if you are a nationalist, just as if you are a globalist or whatever, you have profound moral challenges. And we've been studying and thinking about some of the consequences of nationalism and some of its challenges. How are you a Jewish nationalist, or what does Jewish nationalism mean? Today I would like to juxtapose a certain aspect of Jewish nationalism as I understand it, and what's happening in the modern state of Israel, which I do not believe reflects the best of what Jewish nationalism should be. And in fact, very often, while not yet a nightmare, is on a slippery slope of becoming something that I do not believe represents the best of what Israel Zionism and what Jewish nationalism can be. The core text that we're going to study this morning is Israel's nation-state law. We're actually going to study the law and look at what are they doing and what are they not doing. We're going to study some of the discourse around the law, and as we're going to see, much of that discourse, or some of that discourse, does not necessarily represent what the law actually states. And then we're going to compare this nation-state law and parallel it with a number of other nationalist type of legislations that are being put forth, either passed by the government or being suggested by the government. And then I want to, as a Jew, reflect, is this the type of Israel that I want? Is this moving Israel in the direction of the Jewish nationalism that I yearn for? Or is it moving it in another direction? Now, part of the challenge of most nation states, actually of just about every nation state, is that there are national minorities who live in your midst. While the meaning of nationalism as defined in the categories that I shared with you speaks about your loyalty, your sense of care, commitment to a particular group of people who you have shared origins, culture, history, stories with. The reality is that there is no monolithic nation state. You could form a group with those who came out of Egypt with you, and that's wonderful. And I love walking, and I love the idea that I came out of Egypt, and I love all the stories of the Jewish family. And now we come home, and we are fulfilling our 2,000-year-old dream of desiring to be together, and we didn't come home to a land which had no people. We came home to a land where there were a people. And that people now lives in the midst of my nation state. How do I even begin to think about that question? How do I begin? Is this working? Now it is. How do I even think about that question? See, because Jews in the ghetto never had to deal with anybody trying to elbow themselves in. Like, oh, I want to come. Please let me in. Please, Christendom, this is where I wanted to be. You know, you go to Rome, so now it's quaint. But nobody outside of the ghetto was dying to get into the ghetto. And all of a sudden, we thought we were going to come home and it was going to be the same category. The Jews would build their nation state. We would collect from all over the world, and we would come home and build our country. And oops, there's another people here. And it made it much easier when that other people don't want to live with us. Pre-47, it was an either-or game. It's me or you. Zero-sum game. Who wins? Jews or Palestinians? But over the next 70 years, there emerges in Israel 20% of Israeli society who are law-abiding citizens of Israel. 85% of them, if they're given a choice, would you like your village to be moved to a Palestinian state, or would you like it to stay in the state of Israel? In the case of a two-state solution, 85% of Israeli Arab Palestinians say, I want to stay in Israel. Now, how do we, so on the one hand, we smile and laugh, and it's another victory. It's like, another Nobel Prize. You see, I told you we're better than the Palestinians. But forget the smile. What does that mean about how we think about Jewish nationalism? Because like every nation state, there are multiple nationalities which exist, which, whether they come as refugees, whether they were there originally. After World War II, the world tried to solve it. And there were mass expulsions of peoples to create pseudo-monolithic nation states. But over time, it's just about impossible. And it's probably not even of value. Who wants to live in a ghetto? What happens when two nations live, or three or four live with each other, learn from each other, recognize that to be a human being and the values and rights of a human being aren't exhausted by your national group? That even though you came out of Egypt, there might be people who are really living great lives who didn't come out of Egypt with you. And maybe knowing them, talking with them, learning from them is both not only a moral responsibility, but a great opportunity. Who said isolationism is the best way to preserve your culture? And we in Israel now have a 20% minority. So I don't want to talk about nationalism in general. I want to talk about nationalism here in Israel. And that's without taking into account what will be the political resolution of Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and whether that will add another 4.5 million people into the equation, depend on who's counting. What do we do? Now, what I'd like to put forth for you is that Jewish nationalism at its core, as I choose to understand it, and I won't have to do that qualifier anymore because by definition it's just as I choose to understand it, entails an essential dance. A dance between not two opposites, but two commitments. And it is a dance which requires of you never to resolve those two commitments. I want to briefly share with you a text which exhibits that dance. Then I want to show and I want to look at the Declaration of Independence, which is a remarkable Jewish traditional text, deserving of being studied and learned no different than the Bible, Talmud, and medieval Jewish philosophy and Kabbalah, as a reflection of certain core Jewish values. And then I want to go to the current nation-state laws and see the difference between those texts and these. That's going to be our story. And then we'll reflect on the future, and that will be the framework for my remarks. Let's begin with a core Jewish dance on Genesis 12, verse 1 through 3. And the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And I will aggrandize your name, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you. The first 3 verses of Jewish collective, it wasn't yet national, Jewish collective existence. Let's look at the dance. The dance starts with Lech Lecha, go. In many ways, it's leave. Leave your land, leave your birthplace, leave your father's house. That the beginning of Jewish identity begins with a sense of separation, self-separation. I am not you. And this is in the context of Genesis 11, where Abraham is already going to Israel. But he's going with his father. He's going with his other family. And God says, how do you like your family? It's almost, this is his first Akedah. His first Akedah is here. But instead of having to give up his son, he has to give up his past. He has to give up any connection that he has with the world. How do you like your father? How do you like your family? You having a nice trip? I'm so happy for you. Well, now the rules change. To be a Jew is to be alone to the world, to break with the world, to break with all of your roots. Who you were has no significance anymore, because now I, God, am entering into the story, and I'm going to create for you a new family in which I am the central player of this covenant. And go where? Don't go where you want to go. Go where I'm going to show you. You're going to live in a complete isolated existence. That's where it starts. And part of all national groups, part of all communities, entail this sense of boundaries. That there is a distinction between us and them. And you begin through that act of self-separation. And as your identity is formed, your identity, before having a full understanding of its meaning and of its content, is principally, who are you? I'm not you. And you create lines between you and them. That's the start. And then God says that move to separate yourself from the world and to be with me is going to be one that is going to give you, remember my lecture on whenever it was, seems like a lifetime ago, it's going to be a utilitarian, it's going to be a worthwhile move for you. Because I'm going to make of you a great nation. It's all about you. And I will bless you. And I will aggrandize your name. And you shall be a blessing. What's that? To who? Who are you supposed to be a blessing to? If you're going to be a blessing, who could you be a blessing to? There's somebody else. You know all those people who you've just separated from? You don't have to be a blessing to you, because I got him your blessing. You are the recipient of my blessing, and then all of a sudden the text says, and you shall be a blessing. That world that you isolated yourself from, all those who are not part of your group, all of a sudden, you have some relationship with them. But the text doesn't tell you what. It just tells you that as you are accumulating blessing, part of what I want you to understand is that you're going to have to give some of it back. As you isolate and lech lecha and separate yourself from the world, there's a difference between separating yourself from the world and isolating yourself from the world. And it wasn't isolation that I intended. It is separation, which then has to turn back and re-enter into a relationship with the world. And then the dance continues. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. It's all about you. Who's going to be loved by me? Whoever loves the Jews. Who's going to be my enemy, God says? Who's ever the enemy of the Jews. I, God, am also going to go through a lech lecha. Just like you're supposed to separate from the world, I am now also going to separate from the world. I'm still going to have power over the world, but I'm psychologically not connected to them. Who am I connected to? To you. When I wake up in the morning, all I look at is this news. Good for the Jews or is it bad for the Jews? That's what I look for. That's all I care about. Nothing else. Nothing else. Okay. And then it says, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you. What does that mean? You just told me. What do you mean? You just said that they don't have any existence separate from me. That everybody's only going to receive a blessing if they bless the Jews. And now all of a sudden you say, 1 second. And in addition to that, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in you. What is this text doing? So for different periods of my life, I made the mistake of thinking and trying to understand the consistent move of this text. Which part wins? Is it lech lecha? Is it I will bless you or you shall be a blessing? Is it I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you? And is that the meaning of and all the nations shall be blessed in you? Or is maybe at the first moment of Jewish collective, and I'll, in a loose term, national identity, the Bible is telling you that Jewish nationalism has to be a dance between separation and responsibility to a world. It both has a particular sense, and national identity is incoherent unless you embrace the legitimacy of particularism. And unless you see that as an important, vibrant aspect of how you create a life of meaning. But if your national identity is all about you, somewhere or somehow it is failing to hold on to attention that as Jews we want you to hold on to, and the way the Bible asks you to hold on to it is through almost an incoherent dance, and says Jewish nationalism is about embracing the particular and recognizing that the particular also has to have a relationship with the universal, and that they cannot live in contradiction with each other. Of course they can. But that Jewishly, we don't want you to let them reach that level. How? It doesn't tell you. That's both the beauty of the Bible and its failure. It sets for you these goals, but it doesn't tell you how you're supposed to do it. That's one of the reasons why biblical Judaism failed. Because it had all these great ideas, but didn't tell us how to deliver. So Jews said, okay, I'm not going to keep it. And Jews basically didn't keep Judaism throughout the biblical period. But this idea is a framework for thinking about Jewish nationalism. It's a dance which you're supposed to engage in. Who's a good dancer? What are its exact consequences? There is no halacha. Now, there maybe is a halacha exactly about how you're supposed to shecht a cow, or whether how much milk next to meat, how many drops of milk put on a piece of meat make it non-kosher. So somewhere along the line, someone's going to count how many drops, and at a certain point, they're going to go, whoops, you changed it. But on the big questions of life, it's not about giving you an answer. It's about asking that you engage and embrace and embody a core tension in your life. And then good people could disagree. Smart people could disagree. Moral people could disagree. But do you embrace that dance? That dance of Genesis 12 gets picked up very, very beautifully in Israel's Declaration of Independence. And we're just going to read parts of it. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people, it starts. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. We're talking now about the formation of our country. The land of Israel is the birthplace of the Jewish people. Us. Here their spiritual, religious, political identity was shaped. Us. Here they first attained statehood. Us. Created cultural values of national. Us. Universal significance. What do I care about the universal significance? I'm talking about our right to create. What do I care about our universal significance? What do I care about and gave to the world the eternal book of books? This is where our culture was formed, but our culture is not a culture. This state that we want to create, the Declaration of Independence says, is not a state which is going to be in isolation from others. It's a state which reaffirms our particular identity and at the same time recognizes that without some sense of connection and responsibility, that particular value is somehow not a value. The Declaration of Independence literally takes Genesis 12, 1 through 3, I will bless you and you shall be a blessing, and translates it into a framework to think about Jewish statehood. And in the Declaration's most important paragraph, look at the dance over and over again. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. This state is going to be the nation state of the Jews. And a Jewish state in the Declaration of Independence is not a state of Judaism, it's a state of the Jews. And you can't have, what's necessary if you want to have a state of the Jews? What do you need? Jews. And if you want to be a nation state, you have to have a majority of Jews. You can't claim to have an identity and to take up a sovereign space if your national group does not constitute the majority in that group. How do we then resolve that? Through the law of return. The idea of Jewish aliyah is integral to the whole concept of the legitimacy of a particular identity. I have an identity, and those who share my identity are going to be invited to come here, and if enough come, we're going to have a nation state. And so the clear again starts with us. And then it continues. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. 1 second, you were just talking about aliyah. Now talk about here. We are going to be open to the ingathering of the exiles, and we will be a country that cares and works to ensure that all of these tattered immigrants who come from the four corners of the earth, here you will be accepted, here you will be home, here you will not be subject to anti-Semitism, here you will be normal, here nobody will say to you, be a Jew in your home and a person outside. Here you get to be a Jew in your home and a Jew outside. That should have been the next paragraph, sentence. But that's not the dance. The dance requires that every single time you contract, every single time you speak about the dignity and legitimacy of the particular, you don't allow the particular to dominate, and you don't allow it to create for you an exclusive sphere of moral responsibility. So you spoke about aliyah. Well, I want to make it clear that even though I am giving preference to Jews who will come here because I want to form the nation state of the Jewish people, this country, it is inconceivable unless this country, and I'm going to use a term that is debated, but this, I believe, the Declaration of Independence is this is the country of all of its citizens. Any inhabitant of this country is the responsibility of this country. Jew and non-Jew alike. Okay, now I made it clear. I don't want you to think that in my creating a Jewish state, I'm creating two classes of citizens here. The purpose of this Jewish nation state. This nation state will worry and care about the development of the country, not for the benefit of the Jews, for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. And then it contracts again. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. Part of what happens when you create a particular identity, and part of the importance of nationalism, is that it creates a framework for you to do and think about your moral principles. I don't do ethics in a Kantian sense, in which I attempt to find out what does a rational being, what should a rational being be morally committed to? What are my categorical imperatives that I'm committed to without even understanding who I am, and in a way that I'm willing that these behaviors and principles be universalizable? That's not the way I do ethics. When I'm committed to justice and peace, I'm committed to justice, peace, and freedom because I come from a story. My story tells that. I was a slave in Egypt. My prophets speak about these ideas. So when I, in my nation state, the purpose of creating a particular identity is not just so that Jews will be free from anti-Semitism, but it is that within this context of our home, our culture, our way of thinking, our story could be told. I'm going to live in a country where my story is the story of the marketplace. My story is not my story in my home. It's the story of the marketplace. It's the story of the public sphere. And here we're coming home, not just to bring Jews, but in many ways to bring a Jewish story into a space of normalcy. We contract again. And then it will ensure complete equality of social, political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. We contract it. We're doing the Jewish story. But that Jewish story is not going to be a story that biases the Jews. It's going to be a story that will accept complete and total equality, irregardless of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religion, will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, of the United Nations. The dance of Genesis 12 becomes the dance of the State of Israel in the Declaration of Independence. The fundamental problem that Zionism faces today, or one of the fundamental problems that Zionism faces today, is that the Declaration of Independence will not pass a Knesset vote, and could not pass a Knesset vote for the last 10 years. The Knesset would not approve the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence reflects a profound and beautiful understanding of what Jewish nationalism can be. Let's now look at what Jewish nationalism can become. And instead of the Declaration of Independence, we have Israel as the nation's, the basic law of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, together with the basic law of human freedom and dignity. And I want you to understand both of those laws, the relationship between them, and the consequences that they have for the future of the state of Israel. Now, at the outset, it's really important, just as a show of hands, who here read on their own the basic law of the nation state of the Jewish people? Wow, you're weird. But that's still only about 20% of you. Who heard of the law? Now you're normal. We all heard of it, and we all have opinions about it. Here, there's something really important, however, that I have to share with you. Most of the public discourse around the basic law was not about the basic law that was passed. For a law to pass in the Knesset, there is a first, second, and third reading. The first reading is the reading that various politicians put forth in order to get attention. Because you exist as a politician to the extent that people know that you exist. And in order to get attention, it's not the place for nuance, it's the place for more extreme statements. You take your position to put it on steroids. Then you make your declaration. Then the law goes back into the committees. And there, debate takes place. And in most cases, some of the most problematic aspects of the law get removed. But you only heard the critique of the law of the first reading. That's the one that gets all the press. That's the one that in our partisan universe allows us name-calling, and here it is. You're stupid, you're immoral, you're terrible, blah, 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 because look what you said. The law that actually gets passed, which very often amends some of the most difficult aspects of the law, including the one that we're going to read in a moment, which had and was known as the Apartheid Clause of this law, was in fact removed. But most of you who didn't read the law, and even more of you who, because you have no choice, who don't know that the third reading took out that clause, only have an opinion about the law on the basis of the first reading. While I can't correct your feelings last year, take it as a lesson for the future. Wait to see what in fact takes place. Read the third edition of the law to know what it is that you feel about it. All of us, we are manipulated all the time. And the only solution or antidote to manipulation is knowledge. But you have to take responsibility for that. Now, that doesn't mean that after you know something, everything is great. My own personal position, and I'll share a bias, and at the Hartman Institute, our biases were allowed to put them on the table as long as you state them very clearly. I believe, on the one hand, that much of the discourse around the law in its final edition, that the final edition of the law does not violate core democratic principles. That almost all of the problematic features of the law were, in fact, removed. In fact, I'm going to argue that the law is more or less nothing about nothing. And that most of the law is about as common and self-evident as for citizens of the United States, apple pie, and for Canadians, maple syrup. I am so sensitive. Where's the gentleman from Brazil? How are you? What is it? Macadamia? I don't know what it is. Coffee. Weiß nicht. That a lot of the law pushed us into bipartisan arguments that the law, in fact, does not warrant. And that most of the law is something that most states, and in fact almost all states, have similar laws. But at the same time, I'm going to argue that the law is profoundly destructive to Zionism. And why, I will share with you as we progress. Let's now delve into the law. Let's just read it. Instead of reading all of it, if we had Chavruta, you would have. I'm going to read and comment, read and comment. Now, part of what I'm going to do is I'm also going to show you how almost every paragraph of this law, in fact, existed in prior laws, either basic laws of Israel or prior laws of the country. The land of Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people in which the state of Israel was established. Line 1, Declaration of Independence. The state of Israel is the national home of the Jewish people in which it fulfills its natural, cultural, religious, and historic rights to self-determination. Paragraph 1 of the Declaration of Independence. It's just restating the Declaration of Independence. Then, the right to exercise national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. Here, this is a new statement, subject to reading in multiple forms. And let's look at some of the potential readings of this law. As I understand it, this paragraph was a paragraph that entered into Israeli political discourse, principally by Tzipi Livni, when she was advocating for the two-state solution. And she's the one who said that when we have a two-state solution, Palestinian national aspirations will have to be fulfilled in Palestine, not in Israel. That the whole essence of a two-state solution is that there is going to be two sovereign states living side by side, and that means that within the context of the Jewish nation state, and you have to recognize, by the way, that nowhere in this Jewish state, nation state law is there any demarcation of borders. But it's stating that the right to exercise national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. That means you could have a national group who are treated equally in all, as individuals, as citizens, as communities, even as a national minority. But national self-determination, not your national, not your existence and right to be as a minority. I have no problem, not only do I have no problem, I embrace Palestinian national identity in Israel. I embrace Islamic identity. I embrace individual Palestinian, Christian, Jew, multiple identities. National self-determination in my nation state is for the Jews. You want national self-determination, i.e. sovereignty? That's going to be in another nation state. That's the essence of the two-state solution. And it also recognizes that in the Middle East, as in many other places now in Europe, but particularly in the Middle East, unless there is a clear national identity to a country, you have perpetual civil war. And so this is the first stage. The first two claim, and in many ways, all three are very particular moves, but they're particular moves which have no discrimination entailed. Quite to the contrary, it just reaffirms this is where we were born, this is where our country is, and we're going to be the only group who has national self-determination within the context of the state of Israel. Again, very, very basic, transcends completely political left and political right, not even center. It's actually those who are most for the two-state solution who have to recognize that there could only be, the whole purpose of a two-state solution is to recognize that peace will only happen when we have distinct communities, each with their own national self-determination. Others could exist, whether Jews live under Palestine and whether Arabs live under, or Palestinians live under Israel. That's a separate question. National self-determination has to be singular, otherwise there is perpetual war. That's the essence of the two-state solution. Now we come to the most problematic parts of this whole law. The name of the state is Israel. The state flag is white with two blue stripes near the edges and a blue star of David in the center. The state emblem is a 7-branched menorah with olive leaves on both sides and the word Israel beneath it. The state anthem is Hatikva. Details regarding the state will be determined by the law. Okay. Thank you. I didn't know it was Israel. But thank you for reclaiming that it's the name of the state of Israel. There's a very big debate going on whether we should call it Israel. Big debate about the menorah. Now it's just, a flag should just be white and blue. A lot of people want other colors. Very basic. Every national group has symbols. And by the way, every one of these principles is already a part of the law. It wasn't a basic law, but we already have a law since 1949, which was called the Flag and Emblem Law. And then it becomes the Flag and Emblem and Anthem Law in 2004. It's already in law. You want to make it a nation state? No problem. Hatikva is an issue, but it's not an issue it's not debated amongst the left and the right. Will a day come that Israel is going to have to rethink its anthem? Is this a good anthem or not a good anthem? Do we want an anthem that creates an Israeli identity? When you have 20, do we want an anthem in which all of Israel? I imagine that a day will come that we'll be mature enough to talk about that question. Right now we're not, and that's okay. But there's no great debate in Israel around this anthem. And many countries have really crappy anthems. Star-Spangled Banner is one of them. No, and that's why so many times, what do you choose? God, America the Beautiful. That's what you choose. Somewhere, like along the line, because flags still there. Like, you could do better. And again, I profoundly apologize if it's in this statement I insulted somebody. But please remember, I grew up in Canada. God, Canada has other issues. Okay. Symbols of the state, again. It's again very particular, but nothing. These are the ABCs. 3, Jerusalem, complete and united, is the capital of Israel. That is already a basic law of the state of Israel since 1980. It was already a basic law. Jerusalem is the undivided capital of the Jewish people for now and all eternity. If you want to make it in Israeli politics, you have to be able to say that 10 times backwards. And then you are trusted. Jerusalem is the undivided capital of the Jewish people for now and all eternity. Jerusalem is the undivided capital of the state of Israel for now and all eternity. Great. It's already a basic law. It's not debated by anybody in Israel. And even anybody who's willing to give Palestinians foothold in Jerusalem, and it is possible that this is also part of the Trump peace plan, all do it with Talmudic logic. What we're going to do is we're going to take a section of Jerusalem that Palestinians call Jerusalem and Israelis don't call Jerusalem, and then you're going to have Jerusalem, and therefore Jerusalem will be the divided, undivided capital of the Jewish people in Palestine for now and all eternity. And we are able to do so because we're a people who sell chametz. I have chametz in my house. Is it mine? It's not mine. Me? On Pesach, that I should have chametz in my house? Leaven, I should have chametz? A Jew's not allowed to have chametz. I don't have chametz in my house. Somebody else has chametz in my house. It's not mine. And I might have mentioned this to some of you, but I remember there was the rabbi in Englewood who all of a sudden realized that many people in Englewood aren't home for Pesach. So he said, if you're leaving, I need you to leave me your key in case the person who owns the chametz wants to come and claim it. So I said to him, legal fictions are fine, as long as you make fun of yourself through them. But if you actually take them seriously. So he wanted to make sure that in case the person, because you had to have that. So if I could sell chametz, I could have Jerusalem as the divided and undivided capital of the Jewish people for now and all eternity. I could have it divided between Abu Dis, which section is which. I can even have it divided in levels. But Jerusalem, undivided capital for sure. Even in the Barak peace plan. And why? He said Jerusalem will remain the undivided capital of the Jewish people for now and all eternity. But he meant sub-Jerusalem.
Underneath, we were going to have total sovereignty, and on top, we were going to share sovereignty. But Jerusalem will obviously remain the undivided capital of the Jewish people for now and all eternity. This nation-state law is no news. This is a cornerstone of all Israeli political life. Again, left-wing, right-wing, all across the board. All across the board. Now we come to a more complicated section. One which is more interesting. The state language is Hebrew. With the state language being Hebrew, it's a statement that the state language is not Arabic, or for that matter, English. In the British Mandate of 1920, it states that the mandate for Palestine states that the state language for Palestine is Hebrew, Arabic, and English. That is the basis of all legislation and discourse on language status within the state of Israel. We never affirm. Now, it is perfectly reasonable for every nation state, for any country, to pick its language, to pick the language on the basis of its majority. What's in the United States the national language? You don't have one, but if you want to become an American citizen, what language do you have to speak? You could take the test. I didn't know that. Thank you. Canada has 2 or 3. Many nation states, maybe the United States didn't pick one. Many nation states do pick. It's not a particular explosive issue. But here we have 20% of the society who have another language. What would it have hurt for us to say the nation state, the language of Israel is Hebrew and Arabic? What would have been lost? What would have been lost? It's not. You could say, many Jews in Israel speak Arabic. Many Jews, half the Jews of Israel come from. You could have. Did you have to? Is this a profoundly discriminatory legislation? Read the rest of the law. The state language is Hebrew. The Arab language has special status in the state. So what is the difference between a state language and a language with special status? What? Dignity. Here's where this nation-state law is beginning to move in a direction that is unnecessary if you're willing to say that it has special status. Regulating the use of Arabic in state institutions or by them will be said in law. This clause does not harm the status given to the Arab language before this law came into effect. The purpose of Clause C is to deal with a whole group of legislation, in particular, the laws, I believe it was in 1990 or so, or 1999, where the city of Jaffa and Tel Aviv, Ramle, Lod, Akko, there was a question. Do the street signs have to be in Arabic and in Hebrew? In any city in which there is above a certain percentage of inhabitants who speak Arabic. And the issue was, does it have to be in the neighborhoods where there is a predominant Arab population, Arab-speaking population? And many municipalities didn't want to change because it costs money to change street signs. The Supreme Court rules that Arabic has a special status in the state of Israel, given the percentage of the population and given our decision and the history of this state and our reaching out to Arabs and the choice of these Arabs to build their Arab population, to choose Israel as their country. And consequently, it states that all street signs, not only in those neighborhoods, but in any of those cities, all have to be in Hebrew and in Arabic. So the framers of this law are saying, I'm not trying to discriminate now against Arabic. I'm not going to change the status quo against Arabic. So then you ask yourself, and here comes, if I am a Genesis 12 Jew, wouldn't this have been a place where I could dance? You're giving it special status. You have, remember, another national group who are citizens of your country, 20%. What would have happened if you would have said that the national language of Israel is Hebrew and Arabic? What would you have lost between that or between saying the nation state, the language of Israel is Hebrew, and Arabic language has a special status? How much would what would we have lost at this moment? In recognizing that there's another group. But here we're beginning to see something. The nation-state law is not positing anything discriminatory. It's just not dancing. It's not saying, 1 second, what other concerns do I have? Who else is here? What can I do to make all of Israelis feel that they are welcomed, and more significantly, use the word dignity, that they're seen? The Declaration of Independence speaks about Aliyah, and then for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. What would have been lost? Part of what's happening in this nation-state law is nothing discriminatory, but it's not doing a dance. And what happens when we stop dancing? When we stop feeling that, yes, I don't lose. When Israeli Arabs feel more at home here, it's not that they win, I win. I win. What would have hurt if I would have given them recognition, saying, yes, do you know what, you're not 5%, you're 20%. We have a history, just like the Declaration, just like the Supreme Court. So the law reaffirms the Supreme Court, but instead of reaffirming and embracing it, just puts it there. But again, most nation states have a formal language, and so this move is not dramatic, but it's here, it's not morally flawed. But there's a difference between morally flawed and missing an opportunity for greatness. Then, the state will be open for Jewish immigration and the ingathering of the exiles. Declaration of Independence. Then there's a brand new section here. It's the connection to the Jewish people. And it's a remarkable and interesting section which has positive dimensions and challenging dimensions to it. Because the state of Israel never recognized its and never formally stated its responsibility to the Jewish people other than allowing them to make aliyah. The state will strive to ensure the safety of the members of the Jewish people in trouble or in captivity due to the fact of their Jewishness or their citizenship. Israel declares that it is responsible for any Jew in trouble anywhere around the world. This was an integral part of Zionist and Israeli culture. But now it's part of a nation-state law. The state shall act within the diaspora to strengthen the affinity between the state and the members of the Jewish people. Again, somehow, the old story is that Israelis, they love Aliyah, but hate Olim. You know that one? We love the idea. So now they're saying, no, if you are actually the homeland of the Jewish people, you have to have affinity to Jews all over the world. And Israel's declaring that we are not just the nation state of the Jews who live in Israel, but that we have serious responsibilities to Jews around the world. This is, again, a very declarative statement. It's interesting to ask, what would this statement mean when you have to translate it into law? And it's interesting, at our board meeting, one of our research fellows actually was arguing that there's tremendous potential to argue within the Supreme Court of Israel that it is on the basis of this that we could look at various legislations and issues, whether it be the Kotel, whether now the feelings and opinions of world Jewry has legal status within a basic law of Israel. And whether it has potential to do so or not could be interesting as this law gets integrated into our judicial system. The state shall act to preserve the cultural, historical, and religious heritage of the Jewish people amongst Jews in the diaspora. This is Elaine was very upset about this. Some North American Jews get very upset. What is this paternalism of Israelis towards world Jewry? Is it acceptable? Is it not acceptable? It's interesting, the paternalism of world Jewry to Israel has been accepted since its inception, as every single educational, cultural, religious institution in Israel is funded for and advocated by world Jewry. But here, Israel, part of its being startup nation, part of feeling its success, it's declaring, yes, we have a relationship, we have a responsibility, we're going to have a voice, just like you have a voice in bringing denominational Judaism here. You have a voice about religious pluralism, you have a voice about Judaism and democracy and all of the rest. We're going to talk too. How we do so well, do we do so poorly, do we do so in a respectful manner or not? That's an interesting question. But Israel now has a ministry for diaspora affairs, which is going to ask this question. This potentially could be very paternalistic, but it potentially, if used correctly, can create an avenue of discourse. This law too. This here, we're building on something core in Israel, but we're also stretching Israeli consciousness. But as we stretch Israeli consciousness here, to begin to understand our relationship with world Jewry, the absence of a dance gets even more evident. Because now you're speaking about your relationship to world Jewry. But what about the 20% non-Jewish citizens of the country? Do a dance. Say something. Give me a paragraph. Give me something. You know what? You don't want to give me equality? I'm okay. Because equality won't pass. The religious parties won't allow equality to pass. Because if they feel if there's an equal rights amendment, then all religious legislation will be undermined. So they don't allow an equal rights legislation. Doesn't have to be equal. Just somehow state that in the state of Israel, we recognize that there are national minorities who we reach out to with arms of brotherhood and sisterhood and aspiration to build a country for the benefit of all of our citizens. Something like that. I could write it. It's not so complicated. No, so you'll fix it. It'll have to have an amendment. It'll be the first reading, the third reading. But see them as this nation state in the most beautiful manner sees not only Israeli Jewish citizens, but says, I want you to see world Jewry. The other half of the dance, which is missing, becomes even more and more evident. Then comes the problematic section. The state views the development of Jewish settlement as a national value and act to encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation. In this iteration, this is Zionism 101. Jewish settlement is not settlement of Jews. It's Jewish settlement. It is the aliyah. It is the idea of settling the land, which was at the foundation of Zionism from its inception. It replaced, however, what is known as the Apartheid Clause. Please turn to page 4. Every Israeli resident, regardless of religion or nationality, is entitled to take action to preserve his culture, heritage, and the preservation of his language and identity. Oh, this is beautiful. Wow, every citizen, every Israeli resident, anybody, Jew and non-Jew alike, regardless of religion or nationality, is entitled to take action to... Here it is, here's the dance. The dance I was looking for, right? Now everybody's allowed to preserve. The problem is not A. The problem is what does A create the intellectual foundations for, and that is B. The state may allow a community, including members of one religion or of one nationality, to maintain separate communal settlements. If you're allowed to preserve your national and cultural and religious identity, then are you allowed to have exclusively Jewish and exclusively Arab, exclusively Orthodox, exclusively secular settlements? Now, the Supreme Court ruled already on this issue numerous times. When it comes to small settlements, a hitnachlut, a kibbutz, where there is a clear cultural or ultra-Orthodox even neighborhood,
the country recognizes that very small units, that the community could claim, if I'm a socialist secular kibbutz, I don't want a right-wing mitnachel coming in who wants to be part of this kibbutz. It's just the wrong community for you. That communities can have a distinct identity, and the Supreme Court has allowed it. They've allowed it when it comes to Jews who wanted to move into Bedouin villages, and it has kibbutzim, and on various West Bank settlements, it allowed for a community to create its own distinct identity. But what happens when we talk about a city like Afula, Tel Aviv, Tiberias, Kiryat Shmona? This is not a theoretical debate for those of you who follow the news. The mayor of Afula runs on a campaign and creates a declaration: we swear allegiance to the Jewishness of Afula, and that Arabs will not be allowed to move into Afula. And very recently, an Arab bought an apartment in Afula, causing a whole demonstration. So this was what was known as the apartheid, or the beginning of the apartheid. Apartheid is a whole system, but here it was that on the basis of our distinct national cultures and identities, we're going to allow different citizens, or we're going to create spaces where one citizen is allowed to live and the other citizen is not allowed to live. Netanyahu nixed this clause immediately. And in its stead, speaks about Jewish settlement. But here too, Jewish settlement is the ABC of Zionism. But what happens when you have 20%? What about Arab? Is there any value to Arab cities? Where are they seen? And then the law goes on again and again, and it starts speaking about very, very controversial issues like the calendar and Independence Day and Shabbos and rest. It's all there. This law is no different, not only than multiple other nation-state laws, because that's not enough, because we could do better. But at its core, it doesn't declare anything that's essentially discriminatory, outrageous, morally challenging, and problematic, including Arabic and Hebrew at the end. But it's not dancing. Jewish nationalism is a profoundly meaningful, critical aspect of Jewish identity. But does Jewish nationalism require of me to transparentize Israeli Arabs who live in the state of Israel? It doesn't. But this law, unto itself, makes no mention of the other. Now, the framers of this law say it wasn't supposed to, because we have already a law that does that. And that is on page 9, the Basic Law of Human Dignity and Liberty. And that law states that the purpose of the Basic Law is to protect human dignity, not Jewish. Human dignity and liberty. All citizens' dignity and liberty, in order to establish in a basic law the values of the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. There shall be no violation of life, body, or dignity of any person as such. There will be no violation of the property of a person. All persons are entitled to protection of their life, body, and dignity. And so the argument is, amongst the more serious moral framers of the basic law of the Jewish nation-state law, and there are many who are seriously moral, principled people. Their argument is that you have to look at the basic laws in totality. That there's a basic law of the nation-state, and there's a basic law of human freedom and dignity. I don't have to restate it, it's already there. Technically, that's true. But in theory, what that does is it creates a competition between the two laws instead of a dance between the two laws. That this law could be used to override the other law. And one of the more important challenging legislations on the table of you can't say the current government, but what could have been the current government, and we don't know what it'll be, is what's known as Piskat HaHitgabrut, proposed amendment, the validity of an exceeding law, on page 9. They want to add this to the basic law of human dignity and liberty. A regulation in law which infringes upon the rights given in this basic law will be valid, even when not in accordance with Clause 8, which is a technical issue, if the law was passed by a majority of Knesset members. That means that the Supreme Court, who since Barak is using the basic law of freedom and dignity to ensure that Israel treats all of its citizens with dignity and freedom, and any time they're treated unequally, their freedom and dignity is being abused. In the current nationalist discourse, what is being proposed is that a simple majority in the Knesset, that means whoever is the coalition, could pass any law that they want, and if the Supreme Court overrules it, they could overrule it by a simple majority of 61. Now, you could have said, listen, I want checks and balances on a Supreme Court, make it 75. So that means that if in the event that a Supreme Court is absolutely somehow makes a completely mistaken or erroneous ruling, there is some corrective. And that means you have to go across party lines, and it has to be clear that there is something wrong here. But a simple majority of 61 will not only enable Prime Minister Netanyahu to stay in power, which is one of the reasons for doing so, but it will also enable any legislation, whether that is a legislation distinguishing between Haredi boys and non-Haredi boys, in which Haredi boys don't go into the army, or a law that will allow settlements to be built on private lands, or whatever it might be. Various times that the Supreme Court came out and said basic laws of human freedom and dignity. It might have to do with refugees. It might have to do with the rights of minorities in Israel. Here, this basic law of freedom and dignity, if the Knesset so decides, it could override that rule. And so, in conclusion, in my first lecture, I spoke about different aspects of the purpose and telos of the state. That it has to balance between the pursuit of happiness for its citizens, to redefining what happiness entails, to recognizing that the pursuit of happiness not only does not achieve happiness, but the pursuit of happiness unto itself is not a value. And that nationalism has to understand that there are other values, and only when it does so does it become a nationalism that could protect itself from some potential abuses. And I embrace nationalism as an integral part of my life and as an embracing of Zionism precisely because I live within a spectrum of those three. Knowing the value of this country, and at the same time, the moment where this country has to state, you know what, it's not only about the well-being of this country. It's also about my moral principle. Here, I'm adding a nuance to that. Jewish nationalism must be a dance which reaffirms the dignity of the particular, reaffirms the right of the Jewish people to a homeland, reaffirms our right of law of return to build here a viable country for Jews and to ensure that there is a Jewish majority. But Jewish nationalism must be a nation state of all of its citizens. That every citizen who lives here has to be embraced with full and total equality. And as long as there is a clear majority of Jews, we will have a Jewish state. If there isn't a majority of Jews here, then the Jewish people have decided to not be a nation state anymore. That's our decision. It's on our hands. You want a Jewish state? Make sure that there's a majority of Jews. Make sure that you choose your borders carefully. Make sure that you make core decisions that enable this to be the nation state of the Jewish people. But it is also the state of all of its citizens. And that as I embrace my rights, I always have to remember that I don't only want blessing for Jews. I want blessings for all. In particular, those who are citizens of my country, who aren't. And as Muhammad Darusha taught me and influenced me, made me, because I remember I used to make this mistake until he said, excuse me, Dino, this is not appropriate. I used to get so moved by you shall love the stranger for that you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. You see? What happens when they're not strangers in my midst? They're citizens in my midst. So if I'm supposed to love the stranger, I'm supposed to love my shared citizen on steroids. You shall love the Arab citizen of Israel, not because you were a stranger in Egypt, because you were not loved and you were citizenless in Egypt. We have to rewrite that verse. Our challenge is not to love strangers. Our challenge is to build a Jewish nation state, which is also a state of all of its citizens. Can we do so? The Declaration of Independence says yes. Can we do so? The nation state law legally doesn't ruin the equation. But let's go back, and with this I'll conclude. Let's go back with what Max Nardot said when they started the Zionist Council and the Zionist movement. He said emancipation created legal equality for Jews. But we will never be at home because it is not legal equality, it is cultural equality. Unless a society sees others and culturally assimilates the value of their equality, their decency, their rights, you could have all the laws in the world. The nation-state law is not a problematic law. It just educationally reinforces a culture of us without a dance of them. And even more complicated, they're not a them. They're us. It's an us without a dance to expand that us. We are supposed to be and yearn for blessing for Jews. But we're also supposed to yearn and work for a blessing for all. When Zionism and Jewish nationalism does that, then not only is it not morally challenging, I believe it is morally empowering and uplifting for our people and for Jewish history. Thank you. And now I have some time for some questions, please. Yes, sir.
1 second. Just give your name.
And I apologize. I might take a few. I'm going to ask everybody to please be brief in your questions because I wasn't brief in my lecture. Someone has to pay for it. And there's going to be a post something for those who didn't have a chance to talk now. We'll have a chance in a smaller group to talk further. Briefly, sir. Yes.
That was extremely aspirational. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question relates to how you opened, which is a nationalism of aspiration and a nationalism of discourse. And I want to go back to the Afula, the discriminatory action on the part of the Afula mayor, and ask you in the realm of a nationalism of discourse this question. When the United States experienced incorrectly an enemy, a potential enemy in its midst, the Japanese, after Pearl Harbor, and engaged in horrible actions in a country with, the greatest documents, blah blah. It was because of a feeling that there could be dangerously an enemy in our midst.
Good.
There is an enemy very close by, terrorist actions. And my question to you is, in a context, until the enemy who
Right.
is near is defeated completely,
Excellent
is this nationalism of discourse incorrect?
Correct. Excellent. Here, too, we have to make a distinction. It could be that in 1947, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, we didn't know. And just like during World War II, there was a moment where you didn't know, and then eventually you did, and then you realized you overreacted. Until ISIS, the amount of Israeli Arab Palestinians who have adopted terror could be counted on two hands in 50 years. Israeli Arab Palestinians are not a fifth column in the state of Israel as an empirical fact. When is it that we're going to recognize that? When is it, like, how many times, like, how much must they do? Now, it's true, ISIS began to attract young people from all over, and still the numbers were minimal. Now, that's not to say that Israeli Arab politicians, and that also some Israeli Arab Palestinians don't aggravate me when they were cheering for Saddam Hussein. There are, I know. I'm not making it into a bed of roses and everything is sweetsy. But the reality is that Israeli Arab Palestinians are law-abiding citizens of this country. They have chosen in every poll that this is where they want to stay. This is where they want to stay. When they vote, the fifth issue that they care about is Palestinian rights. The first issue is crime in their own society. The second is education. The third is healthcare. The fourth is jobs. They want to be Israeli citizens. What do we need to do to further that? Now, unfortunately, we're creating a reality, a discourse, as if they are the problem to the vitality and strength of Jewish nationalism. I would argue, and here I'm being profoundly opinionated, this law is the danger to Jewish nationalism. Much greater. It's creating a Jewish nationalism. You could declare your relationship to Jews around the world, but this is a nationalism that Jews can't get around. This is a nationalism that's going to divide the Jews. This is not a nationalism that's worthy of us. And so the fact, it's true. There is a conflict, but isn't it remarkable how few Israeli Arab Palestinians in the midst of this conflict, who even though they say, I don't want to fight against my brothers, and even though we're suspicious, could have been a fifth column like this. In the Yom Kippur War, we would have lost if they would have marshaled. We had nothing stopping the Syria, nothing. But they never did. And I think it's time that they get the recognition. And I think it's time that Israel, as one of the most powerful countries in the world, could recognize, going back to my first lecture, when is it that you take risks for who you are? This risk is even in our self-interest, both from a financial, but even more deeply from a perspective of who we want to be as Jews. And when Jewish nationalism does this, when Jewish nationalism is a place where other national groups who live here, who are treated as equal citizens, and this is a country of all say, I won the lottery because I'm on a Jewish national group, then I think Jewish nationalism becomes something that Jews around the world could become a part of. And Israel, instead of being a divisive force, could be something that we're morally excited by. Yes, please, ma'am. I'm just going to look at the hands. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll stop the first round for now, and anybody who wants afterwards. Yes, please.
I'm Joy Stiefel from Bellevue, Washington, and I now understand from this class how Israel and Israeli Jews have power. But I hear from my relatives that they still have fears, that they're worried that Palestinians of Israel or Arabs of Israel, if they have the opportunity, will murder them in their bed. And I understand from yesterday it's really not true, but they believe it. How can you deal with that?
Now, again, in the Middle East, when you speak about fear, it's not the same way as you speak about the politics of fear, where you feel people are being manipulated. Everybody in the Middle East suffers from PTS. Everybody. Everybody, Jews and Palestinians alike, have 0 degree of separation from death. Everybody has 0 degree of separation from either personal death in their family or knowing directly somebody who was a victim of terror, war, whatever it may be. In that context, you don't overcome fear by telling people there's nothing for you to be fearful of. Because when you try to overcome people's fear who suffer from PTS and tell them there's nothing to be fearful of, guess what you become? You become the one that they're fearful of. Because you're the one who's telling them not to listen to their natural instincts of fear. Fear is real here. But some of the challenges of leadership is not to manipulate the fear, but to help people identify it. Why is it that there was not one single major Israeli politician who stood up during the Afula event and didn't declare, excuse me, what are we talking about? Are you frightened of this person? This? And they weren't frightened. It was, then you start talking about intermarriage. It's like this whole thing. So instead of saying, excuse me, do not worry. We are a country of laws, and we are a country which protects all of its citizens, Jews and Arab alike, and there's no reason why Afula can't function. Listen, in Lod are there mass murders? In Ramla and Yafa are there mass murder? Are the Arabs waking up at 12 o'clock at night to drink Jewish? Like, what's happening? You could speak. But instead, this is the non-spoken. And that's part of the cultural shift that this nation-state law is creating, in which you're thinking only, you're not doing that dance, and the leader could have said, 1 second, what's going on here? This is and then we want to know why the Arabs aren't voting for our parties. Of course they're not going to vote for you. Like, talk, show that you see me. So fear is real, but instead of catering it to here, we could identify it. Iran, something to be fearful of. ISIS, something to be fearful of. Terrorism, something to be fearful of. Hamas, something to be fearful of. Some of the people in the Palestinian Authority, something to be fearful of. Thank God we have a very, very strong army, and we have a strong defense forces which is protecting our country. And there's nobody running in Israeli politics who doesn't take security issues seriously. But these aren't security issues. It's not going to make you sleep better at night if you would have said Arabic and had Arabic, or you would have added a paragraph which says to the Israeli Arab minority of Israel, we reach hands of brotherly and sisterly love in our aspiration that within the Jewish nation state, we will create a state where all of its citizens feel dignified and at home and will foster together for the benefit of the country. Even put a Zionist line in it somewhere. I don't care. That wasn't going to make you sleep. You could have done that. It's just when you don't see anymore, then you use fear instead of to respond to that which is real. You use it to activate and then ultimately become a legitimization for racism and even worse than that. There were 2 other hands. Yes, please, sir. And then there was one gentleman here. And then I apologize. Our time is up, and we'll talk more afterwards.
Hi, Scott from Detroit. When I read this initially, my reaction was this is sort of much ado about nothing, except there was one sort of red flag, and it was in the entry law amendment around if you were actively something, any group that called for the boycott.
No, we didn't get to those laws. Yes, I missed.
The reason it sort of red flagged was
that's not part of the basic law.
Okay, then
that's just additional law added to. I gave you here 3 other laws. One has to do with an additional law of education, an additional law of culture, and an additional amendment to who's allowed into the country.
But could you comment on that? To me, it was problematic on a couple levels because it doesn't really define. You signed a petition once. You're obviously, if you're coming there, you're not a very good boycotter. But more than anything specific to it, it was the idea. I gave a speech in Montreal a couple weeks ago, and no one asked me at the airport if I was for the Quebec separatist movement. Yeah. And it's like I think of the weak Jew, like this paranoid, like the Jew of the Alterman. Or not the Bialik poem of in the City of Slaughter, contrasted sort of the silver platter Jew. Why do we need this? We should be the silver platter Jew. Why do we even have this as a thing? It feels.
It's part of the cultural. I wasn't able to, and I won't. Even though I'm tempted to use your question as a vehicle for giving another lecture, we didn't get to that material, and I'll talk about it more if you want to in the breakout afterwards for those who want. But it's part of a culture in which instead of Israel feeling powerful, Are we really worried about a 22-year-old college student coming into Israel because she signed? Is this what is it that you get to lose and win? And part of the dance, part of this, it's part of a hunkering down. It's part of it's like when also you're looking just at you, you don't even see how people look at you. But it doesn't even matter anymore because who they are, they're not even part of the value of you wanting to be a blessing is you also have a relationship. You talk to people, here they're my enemy. And again, unto itself, many countries have these laws where people who are actively pursuing this aren't allowed in. But again, it's what nationalism, when it's big and when it's strong, has the ability to handle this. When nationalism sees itself as weak and then becomes defensive, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in which not only it makes itself weaker and makes itself less powerful. And it was, and as in the country itself, we spent 2 weeks, world news, about this one little girl, and we were now arguing, did she really, when she was in the University of Florida, was she once, did she change her mind, how much did she change? It was, I think, Israel, startup nation, powerful nation, country with 200 nuclear weapons on missiles that could fly 6,000 miles anywhere in the world on submarines 24/7, 365. And I just told you a state secret. If you ever tell anybody, you're going to be killed. And all of the above. And this country with, again, they speak about, is it the fourth, the fifth most powerful country, army, the fifth, the eighth most powerful economy? When nationalism breathes, it becomes something that you aspire towards. When it gets like this, then it's acting in a way that's fulfilling the rejection of it or legitimizing unnecessarily. It's where it's not only, shouldn't only be right, you also have to be smart in that sense. But we could talk about that more. Last question, sir, and then we'll conclude for today.
Hi, Brian Daves from Houston. So there are a couple things that stood out to me about the law and also your conversation about it. One is, while it was redundant in many ways, it seemed to purposely omit certain clauses of the Declaration of Independence. Correct. The two that you actually bracketed in the documents. The question is why? Why have a redundant document only in certain aspects, if at all? And then second, redundant but also omit those that are particularly concerning. And the last is, if you look at the conditions under which this basic law can be changed, it has a clause in it that is different than other basic laws, in that it says it may not be amended, at the immutability clause in the last clause of the basic law, which means that this not only can there be an issue of how to deal with the conflicts between the human right and dignity basic law, but also that if there were to be a change in the political configuration in the Knesset, that changing this basic law would be extremely difficult because it's not a majority of those sitting in the Knesset, it's a majority of the Knesset itself. And that there's no ability to change it other than to completely replace it with another basic law, which is far more difficult than amending.
Okay, and the last point, that's a technical issue. I do believe that this law is again, to pass a basic law, you need a majority, but a coalition is able to bring not a majority of those who are present at any given time, but a 61 majority. This law doesn't just, a new basic law could amend it, and a 61 number could give you a new basic law. So I don't think this is harder to amend. It's not simple, but the power of this law is that it becomes, when it has a basic law, it becomes one of the foundations of the national discourse. It becomes, who do we see as our country? And I agree with you. Now, the fact that it couldn't add the equality clause, Benny Begin, one of the most right-wing nationalists of Israel, voted against this law because he says, I'll only vote for this law. This is someone who doesn't advocate a two-state solution. One state is Benny Begin from the old Jabotinsky. He says, I will only vote for this law if it has an equality clause. I'm saying it doesn't. I know that the country won't pass an equal rights law. And there isn't a majority because, and the ones who don't want it the most are ultra-Orthodox. And that has to do with the whole place of state and religion. But this law is flawed not just because it doesn't have the beautiful paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. I wish it would. I wish it would. But there is no majority to do that, and politicians made their compromises. My problem with this law is that they didn't even add the paragraphs that they could.
the paragraphs that show the largesse, the dance of nationalism, the moral responsibility of Jewish nationalism, the relationship between Jews and non-Jews, the way we want to envision Israel in the world, those things, even if it didn't echo exactly the Declaration of Independence, it could have been creative in a new consensus manner to elevate our discourse. And unfortunately, it did not. Our challenge, and this is what I said to you in the first day, our challenge is, okay, if this is what Jewish nationalism is doing, what is it that we do? One possibility is to say, then I want to have nothing to do with Jewish nationalism. My own approach, and in many ways a dominant approach within this institution, is our responsibility is to redeem Jewish nationalism. Is that this is a reflection of a small move. And our responsibility as educators is to elevate the discourse so that Jewish nationalism could have the place that it deserves in our people. Thank you all very, very much.